So it's my pleasure to be back at DigitalOcean Tide. I think this is my fourth or fifth session in the same series of Tide. Though we are not able to do this in a typical offline mode that has a lot of energy, a lot of participation, and it creates a very vibrant mood for startups, developers, and the technical audience in India. But we are not missing that thanks to the virtual platform that we have. And I'm pretty excited to be back this time at Tide to talk about cloud native strategy. So this is a mix of technology as well as some of the action items for businesses to embrace this new paradigm, which is cloud native computing. So in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to walk you through some of the evolutionary aspects of cloud native, and then slightly a detailed look at Kubernetes, and finally a very quick demo on how you can take advantage of DigitalOcean's Kubernetes offering, the managed Kubernetes, and some action items on how you can embrace this paradigm. So with that, let's get started. So the agenda for today's session is what is cloud ready versus cloud native, because most of us are familiar with cloud ready, though we haven't been able to label it that way. So I'm going to spend a minute explaining what is cloud ready, and then I will introduce cloud native, where Kubernetes becomes the new operating system, the new Linux, and then how do we embrace this paradigm. So infrastructure as a service has been around for a decade. For the last 10 years or so, since 2010, we have seen a variety of IaaS offerings entering the market. DigitalOcean is one of them. And what IaaS has given us is the ability to spin up virtual machines, create storage devices, and configure virtual networks on demand, and take full control of the infrastructure. Even though you don't own the infrastructure, you have full control of the infrastructure, whether it is virtual machine or carving out storage volumes or configuring secure networks, firewalls, and so on. We had full control thanks to IaaS. Now, IaaS predominantly put virtual machines in the front and center of your cloud strategy. So for a long time, moving to cloud was technically mapping your existing physical infrastructure or physical servers to a set of virtual machines running in the public cloud. So VMs have always been the core deployment units or the core building block of IaaS. Now, on top of the storage, compute, and network, we have security management and automation that gives us the ability to repeatedly, consistently deploy the infrastructure, configure it, and even deploy applications. So the topmost layer, the cloud-ready applications, is what we typically run on top of the IaaS offerings. So this is all about mapping your existing physical servers or your data center to a cloud infrastructure service, and mapping the servers one-on-one to VMs and creating a migration plan, then moving to the cloud, optimizing it for performance, cost, throughput, and so on, and managing the whole infrastructure and your application layer as you start to run your business and as you start to scale, and performing everything that it takes to make sure that your infrastructure, your applications, and your business is completely optimized to take advantage of the dynamic infrastructure provided by cloud providers. So this has been the trend for the last decade or so. So we'll call that as cloud ready. Now, why do we call that as cloud ready? Because most of the applications that typically run in the cloud are not designed for cloud. Line of business applications, ERPs, CRMs, and a lot of existing web applications, they predate cloud. They existed even before cloud became a thing. So what we do is we don't really change anything, but we make sure that they are ready for the cloud. So applications that run inside a physical data center now typically becomes a part of the virtual machine and the IaaS, and that becomes a cloud-ready application. So we don't even have access to the code base. We can't really refactor the application. We cannot design anything to take advantage of the cloud. But the good news is most of them can be targeted by creating a one-on-one mapping between your existing infrastructure and the cloud infrastructure. So those applications that predate cloud but can technically run in the cloud are the cloud-ready applications. But with cloud becoming the mainstream infrastructure, we are able to take advantage of many capabilities. So of late, we have seen a new paradigm called containers. More on this later. But the most recent trend, at least for the last 5 decades, has been the evolution of containers or containers as a service. Now, containers as a service is a new infrastructure layer that sits on top of IaaS and gives you very fine-grained control on how you run applications. So you have multiple containers running inside the virtual machine, which will deliver better optimization and better performance and better utilization of your available infrastructure. And containerized volumes, which are typically carved out of your existing block storage. And then we have overlay networks that are basically a software-defined network, highly optimized for containers. So there is a level of abstraction above IaaS in the form of containers. Now, to manage tens of thousands of containers running in hundreds of VMs, we need a management layer. We need an orchestration layer. That's why there is an orchestration on top of the container infrastructure. And then we have the existing security management and automation that continues to run. For example, if you're using Terraform, you'll continue to use Terraform, your existing load balancers, your existing firewalls, your existing policy-driven rules, and a lot of your security principles continue to remain the same. But just below that, we have a new layer to manage the modern infrastructure and modern applications targeting containers. Now, the applications that are targeting the containers as a service or container as a service, which is also called CaaS, are called cloud native applications. Now, these are the applications that are not, they don't predate cloud. They are born in the cloud and they are designed to take advantage of attributes of the cloud like elasticity, programmability, pay as you go, and event-driven architectures and so on. So these are greenfield applications, meaning that they are designed from the ground up to take advantage of the modern infrastructure. And they don't need to run inside a virtual machine. They don't need to be force-fitted for the cloud. Instead, they are designed from the ground up, from the scratch, to take every bit of possible advantage from the cloud. And that negotiation between the cloud native applications and traditional infrastructure is done by containers and containers as a service platform. Now, most of us are familiar or at least heard of Kubernetes. But before we get there, I want to spend a couple of minutes explaining what is cloud native. So how do you articulate and how do you explain cloud native? Well, cloud native technologies are typically used to develop modern applications built with services packaged as containers. So I'm sure if you're a developer, you know the difference between monolith and microservices. So microservices is a design pattern which will give you a very fine-grained approach to development. So modern applications that are composed as microservices, packaged as containers, run on elastic infrastructure and managed through agile DevOps processes, taking advantage of continuous delivery. Now, there are a lot of keywords, a lot of jargons in this, but let me demystify that. So typically when you develop an application targeting IaaS, your unit of packaging and deployment has always been a VM. But as we noticed, VMs don't give you 100% utilization of infrastructure. For example, in a fleet, in a cluster that is actually running an application, one VM might be experiencing 90% of utilization while the other VM is at 10%. And unfortunately, you cannot pool the resources and balance and recalibrate your application so that it takes advantage of the available capacity. That is not possible when you're using virtual machines. So containers, on the other side, will let you take advantage of this by evenly distributing the workload in a more fine-grained deployment units, which are containers, and that will give you better utilization of your infrastructure, including virtual machines. So containers run inside virtual machines. And instead of creating one large application, We are going to break it down into manageable units, and they do one thing at a time. And that approach and that paradigm is actually called as microservices. Now, code packaged as containers, designed using microservices paradigm, runs on a highly elastic infrastructure that can dynamically grow and shrink. For example, if you are using droplets in DigitalOcean, you are essentially taking advantage of the elastic infrastructure. So the elastic infrastructure gives you the ability to basically scale dynamically and expand when you actually experience spikes. So that is the elastic infrastructure. And finally, when you have this infrastructure that is extremely dynamic and you have highly fine-grained components packaged as containers, deployed as microservices, you can ship software at a rapid pace. And for that, you embrace the capabilities of DevOps and CI/CD, which is continuous integration and continuous delivery. Now, when you bring all of them together, you are actually delivering a new breed of applications, and those are called cloud native applications. So they take advantage of the most modern technologies, infrastructure, design patterns, and deployment technologies to ultimately enable you to ship software more often. We are living in a world where software is no more confined to niche boutique companies or niche services companies. Literally every company today is a software company, whether you are in print media or you are in manufacturing, automobile, healthcare, it doesn't matter. Every company, every enterprise today is a software company. Now, you cannot really stay back or stay away from the mainstream technologies and following old school mechanisms and methodologies to ship software. So by embracing cloud native, any company, whether you are a high-tech company or a non-high-tech company like an automobile company, can take advantage of the same rapid software delivery and rapid ability to ship software, just like some of the companies like Amazon's, Facebook's, and Google's of the world. So that technology, which brings non-technical companies on par with technical companies and technical platform providers, is cloud native. So this is the most recent evolution where you are experiencing a very different life cycle of managing applications. Now, at the front and center of cloud native, we have Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is the new operating system. It is one of the fastest growing open source projects in the history of computing, of course, after Linux. And that's why a lot of people like to call Kubernetes as the new Linux, because it is technically becoming the layer abstracting away every possible operating system, including Windows, and expose a new environment, a new runtime to developers to build cloud native software. So what exactly is Kubernetes? Well, you have IaaS, and remember in the previous slide, I mentioned containers as a service, or CaaS, that sits on top of IaaS. The entire CaaS layer is essentially managed by Kubernetes. It's an orchestration manager. It's a distributed coordinator. It is a platform. It is a runtime. It has multiple faces. It has multiple facets. And ultimately, it provides a platform for developers to deploy software and DevOps to scale and manage the lifecycle of applications. So the breed of applications that run on top of Kubernetes, targeting some of the capabilities that Kubernetes exposes, are called cloud native. So a very quick recap. Cloud ready is what you target for VMs. Cloud native is what you target as containers that can run on one or more VMs and can scale rapidly and is managed by a distributed system like Kubernetes. So that is a very high level differentiation between cloud ready and cloud native. So let's understand Kubernetes a little better. But to do that, we need to really understand and appreciate containers. So one of my favorite slides, which I borrow from Docker's co-founder, is the cargo comparison. So interestingly, in 1960s, the cargo industry has faced tremendous challenge. They had to ship products and goods from one city to another, one nation to another, one continent to another, and they were struggling to mix and match a variety of products and goods. For example, it's not a good idea to mix spices and coffee when they are shipping this. It's not a good idea to mix and match automobiles with brewery. So there are a lot of delicate things. There are very pungent spices. So it was very difficult for them to segregate and isolate them and still take advantage of the same vehicle or the same medium to ship these products from point A to point B. So they had to deal with a variety of mediums, for example, ship to train to trucks, cranes, and so on. And there was no mechanism for them to effectively package these heterogeneous goods that were conflicting and that were too risky to package together and ship them with the same medium. So what happened is eventually the industry converged on one standard. But before we talk about that standard, most interesting aspect is today, software development has been facing exactly the same challenge as the cargo industry. Today, when we develop software, we have very heterogeneous set of components. For example, your static website is running an Nginx with OpenSSL with Bootstrap or React. You have background workers that are processing some batch processing, and you write that with Python and Node.js and FFmpeg if you are rendering videos and processing videos. Your web front end is developed using Ruby on Rails. Your API endpoint is exposed via Flask and Python. Your PubSub is running on Redis with Sentinel. Your transactional database is Postgres. Your NoSQL database for metadata is MongoDB. Your big data is stored in Hadoop with Hive and HDFS. So mind you, all these components belong to the same application. And I'm not talking about a dozen applications here. All of these components belong to the same application, and that is the stack that we are dealing with. And now we have to take this heterogeneous stack and make it work on everything ranging from a developer's laptop to the cloud. And in between, to a staging environment, to a set of virtual machines, to the local data center, to a private cloud, to the hybrid cloud, and then ultimately deliver it in the production environment. So you have to mix and match a variety of components and make it run on a variety of environments. And it is extremely challenging. This is where you get to hear this utterance from most of the developers, where they say, oh, it works on my machine. Right? This typically happens because when you move software from one environment to another, a lot of things break. The dependencies, the libraries, the DLLs, the jar files, anything can break. So very consistently and effectively moving software from one environment to another has always been the biggest pain point and the weakest link in software delivery. So just like the cargo industry has finally converged and agreed on containers as the unit of shipping, the software industry has also converged and agreed on a new standard called containers. So when you package and deploy software in containers, you basically package all the dependencies, and this container is almost like a zip file. It is more than that, but think of it like a zip file that contains everything that you need to run the application. So it is almost like shipping an executable with all its dependencies without a complex install process. Imagine giving a zip file to someone, they unzip it and they run the binary. But software is not that simple. We need many other things to actually make it work. So containers have become the de facto packaging and deployment standard for software development. And the beauty of containers is it just works across a variety of environments. And containers are not entirely new. They have been around for a decade. Solaris has something called zones. FreeBSD has had jails, and Linux had LXC. So containerization was not really new. It existed for a long time, and containers are basically a part of an operating system, but they provide very strong isolation so that applications don't overlap and applications don't get to read the data or access each other unauthorizedly. So containers gave that mechanism for us to package software and deploy software in the most innovative and in the most portable mechanism. So how is it different from virtual machines? Well, a VM is actually a pretty large file, a VHD or a VMDK. it is a pretty large file that contains everything from the operating system all the way to your application code base. So if you're moving the VM from one environment to another environment, you pretty much move everything. And that's the reason why a typical fully configured VM will be almost a size of 4 GB to 5 GB, depending on what you run. But at the minimum, a VM is always at least a GB. And the disadvantage with virtual machines is it doesn't take advantage of the underlying operating system. The underlying operating system is reduced to just the bootstrap or the host operating system that doesn't do anything other than running the VMs, and the hypervisor manages the virtualization and emulation. So even if you're running exactly the same application in 5 VMs, every VM has its own dedicated operating system, its own binaries, libraries, and then the application. And when you are scaling at the unit of a VM, you pretty much replicate the entire stack inside a VM. That's the reason why VMs take longer to scale in a web scale environments. In e-commerce and gaming and so on, VMs are not ideal because they take minutes to scale. Now, coming to containers, first of all, there is no hypervisor. And the second advantage is containers highly rely on the host operating system. The kernel of the host operating system is shared securely across multiple containers. So there is no duplication of software, and there is no rebuilding and packaging of the entire operating system. So that means a container will essentially contain the dependencies like the binaries and the libraries and your code base. And because it is dependent on the kernel, you can effectively move it from a variety of distributions. For example, what you code in CentOS can be very quickly run on Fedora or Canonical Ubuntu or SUSE or Amazon Linux or any flavor of Linux, as long as it has the prerequisite kernel version.
Jankiran, I think you've gone on mute. Yeah, I think you're back.
Sorry.
We lost you again. Yeah.
All right. Is this better?
Better, Jankiran. Thanks.
Is this better?
Yes.
Mohan, can you confirm if I'm audible?
I can hear you, Jankiran. I can hear you. Looks like you're not able to hear us.
Jankiran, we can hear you.
Jankiran, are you able to hear us?
Just give me a second.
You're back. Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right. Am I audible?
Yes. Jankiran, could you just restart from a little bit? I think people would love to see what they missed, but you're audible now.
So that was about containers, and I was talking about how containers are better than virtual machines and how they give us rapid scale. Now, containers can sprawl pretty fast. For example, when you're deploying an application and when you're scaling, you will go from 0 to 100 in just a few seconds. So very quickly, it just becomes unmanageable for you to deal with the scale at which the containers are scaling and running across multiple virtual machines. So we definitely need a new environment, a new platform, a new operating system to take care of that. So that's where Kubernetes comes in. So Kubernetes is effectively a manager of containers, particularly when it is run in a highly scale out mode. So let's take a closer look at it. So there is physical infrastructure, whether it is DigitalOcean or any other IaaS, there are definitely physical servers. And on top of that, we have the droplets or the virtual machines. And on top of the virtual machines, we have clusters that are formed. Now, clusters are basically logical pools of compute resources. For example, in these 6 VMs, I might want to create 3 clusters, evenly distributing the resources. So the number of cores, the memory, and the storage will be now evenly distributed among the clusters. Now the cluster becomes a logical boundary for me to run the applications. Mind you, we are not targeting a VM here. We are targeting a pool of VMs. And when we run applications, we don't really bother about targeting a VM, but how do we run an application inside a cluster, and how can the cluster get the required set of resources? So that is the job of Kubernetes. So in each cluster that we configure, we deploy applications, and managing these applications as well as the clusters is Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is the operating system that is managing the infrastructure as well as the applications that are running inside the clusters. So things like the health and the availability of applications and all of that is typically managed by Kubernetes. So that's why it is the cloud native operating system. So it's time for me to show you a quick demo. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to walk you through a very detailed demo, but I'll show you one quick promise of cloud native where we move from the local machine to the cloud with almost no changes, and how rapidly can we scale the application. So let me switch to the environment. So here I have a single VM running in my environment. So if you notice, I'm running VirtualBox and it is running something called Minikube. And Minikube is a single node Kubernetes cluster, which can be used for development. So you'll actually notice that I'm running Minikube. It's running the most recent version of Kubernetes. And what I've done is I deployed a very simple application inside Minikube. And this application is containerized. So let me show you the artifacts that are involved in this. So here, if you actually see the way the application is packaged. So this runs a to-do application. So basically, I'm wrapping my container image called to-do, exposing it on port 3000, and I'm actually telling Kubernetes to run this container, which has a dependency on a MongoDB database. So here is the MongoDB container that I'm using. So a MongoDB container and a Node.js container, and each of them are running as what Kubernetes calls as pods. So to make the web application talk to MongoDB, I need to set up a bridge, or rather a service discovery. Now that happens through what is called as a service in the context of Kubernetes. So typically when you package container as a pod and deploy it, they are not exposed, or they're not really reachable. Other pods cannot communicate with this pod so easily. So we need to set up a network connectivity between pod 1 and pod 2, in our case, the web pod and the database pod. And the way we do that is to create a service. So typically the combination of a pod plus the service in Kubernetes represents a microservice. So in our scenario, we have 2 microservices. One microservice running MongoDB, the other microservice running a Node.js web application. Now, obviously, the service attached to the MongoDB is internal. So you'll notice that it is a cluster IP, which means this IP address is visible only within the cluster. And this is only meant for the web application to talk to the database. But to make the web application accessible to the outside world, I expose this microservice through a load balancer. So it's a very simple architecture. You have a load balancer as the front end that talks to one of the microservices, which is the web app, and the web app talks to the MongoDB, and connecting the MongoDB with the web app is a service. So I go ahead and deploy this application using a simple utility called kubectl. Now I can say kubectl apply, and it basically deploys the microservices. 1 pod plus service for MongoDB, 1 pod plus service for the Node.js application. Now I can go ahead and access my application. So I can type what is called as Minikube service web, and this opens up a browser window. And very soon you'll see a simple containers to do landing page. So this is running on my local host, or rather the Minikube. Now, the advantage of using Kubernetes is the application is highly portable. Now, I take the same application that is currently running on my development workstation through Minikube and run it in DigitalOcean. So to do that, I basically go to DigitalOcean's console and I create what is called as a Kubernetes cluster. So if you're already a customer of DigitalOcean, you know that you can create droplets, you can create managed databases, you can create load balancers, and more recently, you could actually create virtual networks. Now, you can click on create cluster, and this is going to launch a Kubernetes cluster. And this Kubernetes cluster is essentially an abstraction on top of droplets. Now, to save time, I have already gone ahead and created a Kubernetes cluster, and it is called Tide Demo. And this cluster is an abstraction of 3 droplets. So if you actually click on droplets, you see that there is a pool, and this pool is managed by Kubernetes. So the managed DO Kubernetes, DigitalOcean Kubernetes, all it does is it basically spins up a set of virtual machines, set of droplets, and runs a distributed software, which is Kubernetes, to give you the ability to deploy and scale applications. So when I create a Kubernetes cluster in DigitalOcean, the workhorses are still the droplets, but you never have to SSH into any of these droplets. You never have to patch, update them, or open ports, because all of that is abstracted by Kubernetes. That is the cloud native operating system. I would like to call that as the new modern cloud native OS, because you will never have to deal with individual VMs that are abstracted by Kubernetes. So now that my cluster is ready, I can go ahead and download the configuration file that is very important for me to connect to the cluster. So there is a link here called download config. This is the most critical step. Once your cluster is up and running, you download the config, and that comes back to your local machine as this. So this is a simple YAML file that has some certificates and the endpoint for you to talk to the cluster. So my Kubernetes cluster is currently running in Bangalore data center of DigitalOcean. So you see that this is the endpoint where my applications will be actually running. I mean, that's where I'm going to target. So once we set up the kube config. So kube config is the environment variable that will point my Kubernetes client to the DigitalOcean's Kubernetes cluster. So I'm moving away from my local Minikube to a fully fledged cluster running in the cloud. So now I go to this directory and I run the application. Again, exactly the same command, kubectl apply, and this is going to basically deploy my application. Now, I only make one change. Because MongoDB needs persistence, MongoDB needs some block storage, I actually add a PVC here. So PVC is like, think of it as the cloud native block storage. So I'm creating a cloud native block storage here, which is called DO block storage, and asking for 5 GB. So this YAML file will actually call DigitalOcean's API, provisions a disk and attaches that to the cluster, and then mounts MongoDB's data DB directory on that volume. So that is the only step that I need to do, because I don't want my Mongo pod to die if one of the nodes have a problem. So I'm creating an external persistent storage through the block storage volume and targeting my MongoDB to that specific volume, and everything else remains exactly the same. So this is the cluster IP for the web service or the to-do application to discover and talk to my MongoDB. This is the web app. And this is basically the load balancer. Nothing changes. It's exactly the same definition. You know, this is what you see running on my Minikube, and this is what you see running on DigitalOcean's Kubernetes. Absolutely no change except the PVC. Now, if you come back to the console, you also notice that there is a new load balancer created. So this load balancer, if you actually look at get service, so this shows that my web endpoint is exposed via a load balancer, and this is the IP address. So I'm going to grab this and access it from my browser. So this is now hitting my Bangalore data center of DigitalOcean and it is showing us the new, okay, there was a typo, but never mind. So this is basically how you access the web application. Now that's not all. So currently, if you look at the number of pods, which are the units of deployment in Kubernetes, there is exactly one database pod and one web pod. The beauty of Kubernetes is the ability to go from 0 to 100 in just a few seconds. So now I can actually scale my application. So let me split the screen to show you how this actually works. So I'm going to grab this environment variable, split my terminal, and set the kube config and put my pods in a watch mode. So kubectl get pods. So currently you notice that there is just one web pod and one DB pod. Now with just one command, kubectl scale followed by the deployment, which is web, and how many replicas do you want to run? So I want to run 10. That's it. Now one command which will scale your web app from just one pod to 10 pods. So now if you actually notice, the containers are getting created and they are very quickly moving into running mode. Now achieving this feat with VMs is, you can't even imagine the scale at which you can grow your cluster, your workloads on Kubernetes is phenomenal. Now in just about 25 seconds, and as you see, we have gone from 0 to 10. And provided my cluster is capable of handling, I can scale this from 10 to 100 and even 1,000. All I got to do is add more droplets. And these pods are actually running across all the 3 VMs that we have seen here in the console. So you never know which VM is actually running which of these pods, and you don't need to. That's the beauty of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes will perform the coordination, scheduling, orchestration, and will make sure that the best possible VM, best possible droplet gets to run the pod. So that is what is called scheduling and orchestration, and Kubernetes is pretty good at that. So let me summarize what I have shown you. So I have shown you how I deployed an application in my local environment running a single VM cluster. And once I was convinced that it's all ready, it's all good, I have gone ahead and deployed it to a production cluster running in DigitalOcean, and I have scaled from 1 to 10. Of course, I have skipped a lot of steps due to lack of time, but I typically show this demo all the way from running Node with Node.js, and then containerizing it, and then packaging it for Kubernetes, and moving the entire thing, and even setting up a CI/CD pipeline where the moment you commit code, it shows up in your cluster, and you can even define how many pods you need to run. So pretty dynamic, pretty exciting way of shipping software. So that was a very quick demo. And by the way, when you're actually running Kubernetes on DigitalOcean, you don't need to install Kubernetes. It is a managed service like the databases and the other managed services. So with a single click, you can define your Kubernetes cluster size, choose the region, and boom, you go live with a fully fledged, fully compliant cluster. So that was about a quick demo of using Kubernetes with DigitalOcean and how you can scale your applications. Now, remember, this talk is all about how do you embrace cloud native and how do you apply that to your business. Till now, I've been talking technology. So let me give you some action items and help you understand what are the next steps. So how do you tell that you're actually following cloud native? Well, there are 4 thumb rules for you to follow. The first one is move to containers. If you're designing an application and you're still at the whiteboard level, this is the best time to consider containers. So you are using containers. That is the number 1 thumb rule in the checklist. And then you are following the microservices pattern. So instead of creating a large application, you're breaking it down to a logical, functional, only one component, which is a microservices paradigm. And there are a lot of best practices. You might want to follow what is called as a 12-factor app to design your application as a set of microservices. That is the second action item. The third one is you follow DevOps, where you basically automate your software development and deployment, and you collaboratively work with your development and operations team in enabling continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous monitoring, and basically making sure that your environment is taking advantage of agile and highly dynamic processes. So that is DevOps. And finally, you are implementing a continuous delivery pipeline, which basically helps you in shipping your software at a lightning speed. So you basically create a pipeline, which is like a supply chain, but that supply chain is responsible for shipping software. One end of the supply chain is your source code. The other end of the supply chain is your Kubernetes cluster. And in between, you have your integration tests, you have your packaging and deployment, you have your blue-green deployments, you have your canary releases, you have your observability and monitoring. All of that is taken care, but when your software passes through all these phases and hits the final endpoint, it shows up in the production environment. That is what is continuous delivery all about. So when you apply these techniques, so when you start to package and deploy your software as containers, designed as microservices, implemented via DevOps, and shipped through continuous integration and deployment, you are essentially following cloud native. But why cloud native? What's in it for me? Well, number one, optimal resource utilization. You have seen how we could scale from 1 to 10. And when you monitor the utilization of every droplet or every VM, you will notice that it is evenly consumed. So you will not have blind spots, you'll not have hot spots where one VM is 90% and the other is at 10. This is going to result in better utilization, and indirectly and directly, it also impacts your cost. Rapid software delivery. There is no excuse to improvising on customer experience and shipping software more often to always deliver better experiences. So irrespective of the business that you are in, whether you are talking to your customers via mobile apps or web apps or even televisions, it doesn't matter. You need to ship software more often and add features at lightning speed. So cloud native will help you accelerate that entire process, where, from the time the developer commits the code till it shows up to your customer, you can reduce the time it takes. And of course, it all results in faster time to market, better competitive stand in the market, and you're actually able to move much faster than your competition and delivering better experiences to your customer. And ultimately, closed loop feedback, where your customers will report an issue to you and you can very quickly fix it and ship it back to your code, so your software. So all these are the benefits of cloud native. So it's time for you to consider cloud native and Kubernetes based on containers, and it is going to really help you in taking advantage of not just the technology benefits, but also delivering better experiences and delighting your customers. So what are the next steps? Start with a new application, follow the microservices design pattern, package services as containers, implement CI/CD for deployment, leverage managed Kubernetes offerings like DigitalOcean's Kubernetes, and start shipping. So I know this is an oversimplified workflow, but this is the high level checklist that you need to follow to embrace cloud native. So that actually brings us almost to the end of this session. And let me see if there are any questions. I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to quickly take a couple of questions. So there is a very interesting question. So when a database pod is replicated, will the data be shared among the users and different database pods? Unfortunately not. So basically, you can only scale stateless components and not stateful components like databases. To actually scale stateful components, Kubernetes has a paradigm. It has a controller called stateful set. And that's how you basically increase the number of stateful pods. It's almost like running a master slave or a read replica, where you can add more replicas to your cluster. But you cannot apply the same rapid scale theory to stateful workloads like MongoDB. One more question. So are the bare metal containers supported by DigitalOcean? I'm not sure. I don't think DigitalOcean has a bare metal cloud offering. And there is actually containers running on bare metal. It's a very high-end infrastructure offered by very few. As far as I know, DigitalOcean doesn't have an offering of a bare metal cloud.
Jankiram, there were also a couple of
So
questions.
there is another very interesting question. So I used a command to scale the number of instances. The question is, can we apply an automated mechanism to scale? Absolutely. Auto scale is one of the core capabilities of cloud. It has been around for a long time. And Kubernetes supports it out of the box. There is something called HPA, horizontal pod auto scale, which can read the metrics from the pod, for example, the current available CPU resources, memory, and so on. And it can automatically increase and decrease the number of pods. So it need not be manual. You can automate it by creating what is called as a HPA. So with that, I conclude the session. We are 5 minutes over time, but I hope you found this session useful. And I look forward to talking to you again in one of the DigitalOcean events. Have a great conference ahead. Stay home, stay safe, and make sure you're maintaining social distance. Thank you.